So it worked.
Hello, Ed.
Hello, Gerhard. How are you?
Fine. We already did the test drive yesterday and found out it works perfectly. And so we actually prepared some questions. I will just ask you some general questions, and then now we also started to put together a list, you know. And of course it's a rich list of questions, you know, which might lead into 3 hours of conversation, but we have to actually just cut it after 1 hour, you know. And first, yesterday when we started discussing, you said that you would like to start with the conditions for innovation, you know, and also look at the questions around technological complexities, you know, in companies. And then we also came to the point where you talked about multicultural teams and how should they be put together. And you started to talk about a case of a hospital in Seattle that could illustrate the whole setup of all these different pieces. And we could also go into the concept of leadership as offering process help, how you proposed, and the concepts of mutual helping, you know. So first we would start with the conditions for innovation.
Well, you know, I'm always more interested in, to put it, in structuring my own thought in my own way. So I may not, can you hear me all right?
Yeah. Yes.
I may not answer the questions in the form in which we talked about it. What I would like to do is to tell you what is new this last year. How long ago was I with you? Was it 1 year or 2 years ago?
No, it was 2009, you know. 2009, so it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Actually also here at IBM, we did the workshop together, you know. So
that was 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Okay, so I was trying to think what really has happened in those 2 years. And there are several things. We had already talked about the helping book.
Yeah.
The helping book was out. And I was making the argument that because the world is becoming more complex and global and multicultural, and because information technology has made things like this possible, what's really happening in the world of work is that leaders have less and less the ability to make decisions and are more and more dependent on subordinates and peers because the knowledge is distributed more widely. And what that means is that the requirements for coordination and mutual helping are going to get even bigger as each piece of the world gets more complicated. So all the functions in business are more complicated. Finance, marketing, they're all becoming complex. And so the leader of a team has less and less the ability to make a final decision and has to learn how to get help from his subordinates, which means the leader has to become more not only willing to accept help, but be able to create the conditions where the subordinates will actually tell him things. So the example which comes out of my work on safety, in a typical hospital situation, the surgical team that used to be, oh, the surgeon did the whole job and everybody else was just helpers. But in today's surgery, there's like to be very strong interdependence between the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, the main surgical nurse, possibly the person who runs the heart-lung machine. And even though the senior surgeon is in complete authority, if he or she doesn't have a good relationship with his other team members, he may be starting to do something wrong, and they will have to say, "Doctor, we have to do something differently because of some new data that we see that you don't see." And at that point, the surgeon has to be willing to listen to those subordinates and thank them for their effort, instead of in the old days, if a nurse spoke up to a surgeon and said, "You're doing something wrong," the surgeon would shout at her and say, "Shut up, I'm in charge here." That sounds silly, but that's actually what went on in a lot of surgical rooms. The surgeons were absolute autocrats, and people would be afraid to speak up to them. So the big thing, the big change, I think, is the greater need for what a colleague of mine, Jodi Gittell, Gittell, and you should look up her work. She has created a center for what she calls relational coordination, that increasingly people have to get into a relationship with each other, which makes coordination possible. And she has developed this idea, working, for example, with what's the airline that's doing such innovative stuff in the U.S.? I'm getting older and I can't think of names anymore. Southwest. She studied Southwest Airlines and found that the reason they were doing so well is because everyone knew everyone else's job, so that they could truly coordinate with each other and compensate for each other when something went wrong. So she developed a test that measures what she calls relational coordination, which is that if two people have to coordinate, they have to, first of all, have a shared goal. Secondly, they have to understand each other's work. And third, they have to have mutual respect. So the relational part of the coordination is the human part, the respect. The coordination in relational coordination is the mutual goals and the mutual understanding of each other's work. So this idea, which she has worked out excuse me, and tested particularly in healthcare settings, doctors and nurses and the different technical people, do they have a shared goal? Do they understand each other's work? And do they have mutual respect? Because if they don't, the system won't work properly. So these ideas, I think, all have a lot to do with the question of what does innovation and inspiration need today? I think it needs much more coordination and relationships across a wider, diverse set of skills. The creativity will now come out of the group, where in the group you have different cultures, different occupations, different ways of doing things, but it won't work unless the group is in a good state of relational coordination with each other. Do any of you, have any of you run into this concept? Because she has published also a book about relational coordination in healthcare.